Hey there. How's everybody?
Hello. Not
Very
too
good,
bad.
thank you.
How are
Um,
you doing?
I'm good. Happy, what is this? Happy Monday. I don't know about you, but I feel like I have a lost sense of time and space in this whole COVID. The weeks bleed into the weekend. The weekend bleeds into the week, actually having like downtime. Um, we're waiting for Ty to jump on, but we're going to start and probably just dive in because we know we're a couple minutes behind. And these online sessions that are an hour, I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of scratching of surface of conversations that you don't really get to go that deep. So let's jump in, and then maybe we will see him throw in at the end, and we'll get our introductions out of the way. Do you want to start, Chris? So we're going alphabetical order. I was about to say Dalton, and I was like, no, C comes before D, Karen.
For sure. I can
And then we'll, just a quick intro, just a bit of background on where you're at, what you're doing, and then hopefully, as I said, he'll be on by then, and we'll be good to go.
So I'm Chris Wilson. I currently work for the Drake Hotel Properties as the head of music and culture. I previously was working as a program and producer for Free Studios, which oversees a brand, the Creator Class. I was responsible for the programming, the membership program that they were looking to develop at that time. Before that, I was living in the UK, in London, England, working for Ace Hotel as the music PR and talent booker. That's a good rundown. I mean, Drake, I'm responsible for all the cultural programming at all of our properties. So that's the Drake Underground, Drake 150, Drake Devonshire, Drake Mini Bar, and obviously the hotel.
All right, so you got that international scope as well as the local and regional.
Yeah.
Covered all the bases. Dalton,
Yeah,
tell
totally.
us your. I'm sure both your resume could go on as long and longer than Chris's.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're going to keep it. We're going to give you the short bio. So yeah, presently, so I'm a publicist and PR strategist that, I work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, pretty much, every major label in Canada, and a lot of American record companies. And, some people know, like Chris said, it's a bit of the art of reinvention. A lot of us we're like multi-hyphenates. So, to say that you just do this one thing would be absolutely ludicrous. For people that are, a certain age, they know me as a journalist. I wrote for a bunch of, obviously Now Magazine, Toronto Star for many years. And then also I've written 6 books that mostly deal with popular culture, hip hop culture, and one is actually about fatherhood and hip hop. All right. So, and then another part of the portfolio, which we can get into today, is music programming. So I've been doing that for many years, since the early 2000s. Working with a company called Shine out of New York, and I started actually programming concerts and workshops out of like malls and stuff, shopping malls. So malls like in the States and even Toronto too, Cadillac Fairview, doing like big concerts in malls. All right, so so if you can think back, Chocolate doing a concert in a mall, chaos. That's kind of my background. And then obviously Harbourfront Centre, I was there for a number of years, booking over easily maybe 500 plus concerts. So kind of been around the block. Yeah.
So I wasn't planning on saying a bit about me, but since we're still waiting for Ty to drop on, I'm the co-founder of an organization that some folks may know called BAND, which is Black Artist Networks in Dialogue. And we started that about 10 years ago, myself, Maxine Bailey, Julie Crooks, and Karen Terrell. Most recently, I was at Myseum, spent 4 years building that from scratch, and it's off still doing cool stuff with the team there, making me proud after my departure. And I also recently launched an art fair in the Caribbean. So similar to, I think, what Dalton and Chris's comments were around having local, national, and international scope to what is happening with things in our particular vantage point around arts and culture. So I know Ty's footprint is both in the funding because he worked for the Arts Council as well as someone who's active at the community arts level. I think once he jumps on, we'll just kind of maybe get him to do an intro before he comments on the first question. But let's get going because, as I said, we know you turn around and an hour's gone. And we want to give a chance for people to engage in the conversation. So this, just so folks know, I don't know if I need to say this, but I feel like I need to at least say Small World Music. Hey, there you are. How are you?
What up? I'm good.
Very good. So I was just going to say that this Global Toronto is a festival that's produced by Small World Music Festival or Small World Music, and we're grateful that they've asked us to engage in this, but we're also know that there's a time right now where things are being called out. And this was interesting. I don't know about y'all, but it's interesting to me because of the way it was framed as a calling in. So for me, that's starting to think about how we move forward. But before we jump into the conversation, Ty, why don't you do a quick intro of yourself? Chris and Dalton have kind of given their sense of a bit of their resume, and then we'll dive into the first question comments.
I like how Chris is like the Drake Hotel. He's just the whole Drake Hotel.
He is the Drake Hotel. You didn't know?
It's true.
I am.
The whole city on his back. The whole Drake Hotel on his back. So I guess my background is definitely in I guess arts, but more on the organizing side, or I guess in terms of community, but also in terms of funding as well, and supporting artists in terms of access and all of those sorts of things, and navigating the world of funding. So my kind of experience kind of takes me to sort of emerging arts organizations, usually that are focused around people of color, Black folks in particular. And then, I've worked at Toronto Arts Council, Outreach Toronto, Factor Canada, and, I've been in conversation with many other funders out there. That's my kind of background, I suppose.
Okay, cool. So this panel, as we know, because we all got the brief, is about the calling in, and it's the idea of how do we start to hold institutions, organizations, and I think for us, this discussion can go as wide as we want based on the range of kind of private business involvement that Dalton and Chris would have, to community and art funding. I'll have a range of knowledge on, so feel free to kind of use whatever anecdotes you think make sense based on your experience. But maybe let's start with Dalton on this one about what does calling in mean to you at this stage of the game? As I said, I was interested in this because it seemed to talk about how we start to move forward. We know people are being called out, but if you're calling in, you may be starting to think about what is the reparative actions that need to happen in order for us to start to move forward. Do you want to start, Dalton?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you a two-pronged answer here. I think as far as calling in, certainly, my background, we talked about before Ty joined us, this idea of, the art of reinvention. So a bunch of us here, we've done many, different things. Even Chris, for example, he's a DJ, sound selector. Like there's many, that Drake Hotel thing cannot fully accommodate what you were doing. So I started out, Karen Carter, this as a news reporter at Now Magazine in the 90s. And so I'm really big on, this idea of, collecting facts, like facts over feelings. Okay. And what I mean by that is in news departments, so you can have a bunch of opinions and you can sort of rely on, rumors, innuendo, dogma, rhetoric. News reporters are very into facts, collecting hard data. So what that means for me is when we talk about this idea of calling in, it's looking at the facts, just the facts, man. Facts over feelings. Nothing to get overly emotional over. Let's do a forensic audit, of whether it be, a gallery, a museum, music programming institutions. You need to do an audit, an effective audit, to basically document and account for, we're talking about anti-Black racism. So we're saying here, we're all based in Toronto, which is the most multicultural city on the planet. There's a large Black community, Black people of African descent. So where are they situated? From an employment standpoint, are they working on the front lines, on the back end? Are they working in positions of authority? So without this hard data, without this, you be able to calculate all this, it's very difficult trying to move forward, right? So facts over feelings. Now, calling out, I think it's important. I'm going to juxtapose that with saying calling out is hugely important as well. Now, we live in Canada, and in Canada, sadly and unfortunately, the racism here it's so subtle. It's so underhanded. It's very quiet. Maybe it's a more kind, friendlier version, but it stings. Nevertheless. So I think in Canada, because it is so subtle, you can shake hands with a non-Black person and say, "Hey, let's get this deal done," and then a week later you lose the deal. And then you kind of sit there wondering why the deal didn't go through. Is it something I said? Is it what I was wearing? Is it because I'm a Black guy? And a lot of roads ultimately end back to the racism thing, the anti-Black racism. So in Canada, we need to call out institutions, galleries, people, managers, directors, colleagues, staffers. We need to call them out in Canada. In the U.S., it's more. You all probably spent a lot of time there. People will just tell you how they feel. In Canada, they don't do that. So you need to call people out in Canada.
Chris, do you want to, or actually, I think I'm going to ask Ty to jump in there, because I feel like that aspect almost leads to something we talked about in the pre-discussion around the truth-telling before you could get to the reconciliation.
Yeah, pretty much I think Dalton kind of spoke to what we were talking about, but basically, I was thinking about the idea of somewhat of on one end, like there should be like a sort of financial or economic accounting of how we got here and what the cost has been in terms of access and equity and all of these things for Black artists. So I kind of think the idea of having some type of truth-telling or investigation or audit of the true cost that there's been to Black art and what we've lost in that. And then I think there needs to be a reconciliation. And the reconciliation is probably going to be more focused on correctives than anything. And I came up with a few. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to share them, but I have a few.
Sure.
Cool. So the first one, I'm gonna try to focus on like artists. I'm gonna go small and then big. So individual and then institution. So I think generally like white artists should be doing more work, and I'm only speaking in sort of this vein. Definitely like I have a bias towards music because I've worked in the music industry, but I think that white artists should be offering more support to artists of color, to Black artists in particular, as far as business side. So if you've got good contacts, if you've got a family member, if there's an ex that knows how to write a really good bio, whatever it is, like you should be sort of offering up those constantly, as well as advocating. So, you're seeing a lot of petitions and all of these different things going around. Like, please participate in those things, and please ask questions if you don't, know what to do. The next is, I think that funding bodies, oh boy, here we go. I think that funding bodies should ask white applicants to I guess, think about their impact on applying at all. So funding bodies should be asking white applicants in particular, what is the art that what is their whiteness and the art that they make, and what is their proximity to that art? Or it might be that art comes from a particular community and they came up, however that will go. But I think that they should have to speak to their own whiteness in proximity to the art that they want to make. Like they should have to explain themselves in that way in the application. And I also think that they should also be thinking about what might the cost be to a Black artist or POC artist by applying at all, by putting in this application, by submitting it. What is the cost to Black people? You should be thinking about that, right? And then the third thing is, maybe we should be putting a cap. I shouldn't say maybe. We should be putting a cap on the amount of white people that can sit on a jury at any time. We should be putting a cap on the amount of white people that can receive funding at all. We should sort of put these things in place as a corrective. And then the last piece, was this. I was thinking about. I won't get into the numbers, but I was thinking about that. We could at least put together a fund to be able to say that we support white art. So we could have a fund within every funding body instead of having an indigenous program. We could have a white people program for those artists to be able to know that the funding organization cares about them and is inclusive of all art forms and everybody's culture and all of these things. So those are my sort of ideas around reconciliation. I know to some degree they're a little. Say again?
We're going to unpack the bucket for the white artists, because I'm wondering if that was a misstatement and you meant for Black artists. But I feel like there's an interesting dichotomy in them having a bucket, because right now it assumes that the rest of us have buckets and all of it's for them. Chris, do you want to jump in? And you can start by just talking about what calling in means based on, or calling out means based on some of the experiences you are witnessing or seeing firsthand. And we were going to get into some of the actual ways that we could talk about repair or how to move forward. And so I've written some notes based on some of Ty's comments about, do we have the answers, or are we charging others to go find their own answers, and how to find that balance between what we want people to go find? I'll throw it over to you though, Chris.
Calling in for me, at least in these times and watching the things that have been going on, as a Black man working within institutions, cultural institutions that normally typically profit from culture, and that culture being Black culture, it's very important in my role to call out those who are calling out those companies, and sometimes people want to remove themselves from that change, that they want to make change happen, and they feel that calling out and attacking the institution is a way for them to be able to seek that change that they believe in. That's one way that you can do it, and it does bring it to the attention of everyone, but it's important that for these institutions to understand what has to happen, working with inside them to hold them accountable for the change that's necessary. It's easy, and it's very easy to just want to roast and gaslight a company, and that's very necessary when the company isn't aware of the practices that they've been going through. Being an individual who works within those institutions, it also sheds light on the work that person could have been doing and puts them in a difficult position. So calling in is important, because those institutions have to understand this is the changes that they need to make, and then be held accountable for it. And by taking those actions within them to actually ensure that Black individuals are in a position of power and leadership to be able to develop their skills, but also hire other Black individuals so that they're able to develop their skills, and then through that be able to move. But the representation is what they need to be aware of, and the fact that representation and that voice and that narrative is being dictated by a Black person versus it being dictated by a white person that isn't going to see the beauty in what it is that we do, or be able to depict that beauty. And when you all have an understanding of it, and I can't say that they're going to have an understanding in a quick, brief time by reading books and by having and hiring a diversity and inclusion officer, but it's important to be able to hold them accountable for those actions, and then through that have that change be delivered through their corporate infrastructure, so that we're actually able to see the exhibitions that are necessary, see the curators be delivered throughout the program, and see a Black programmer come in and speak to it. Because it's not only having that voice of that Black individual within that space, but it's the lens that they're looking at. And that lens is very difficult for a white person to be able to have and to see, because they haven't gone through those experiences. And even though they might step and make those decisions, they need someone that's going to have that lens. So calling them out for me is having a conversation that makes them feel uncomfortable, but I'm able to do that through my own institution that I work for and have them make those changes. But at the same time, when within my position, I can, even though I might not work with the other institutions, but I partner with them, it's an opportunity for me to question the way that they're operating and running their business and have that conversation as well. So by calling in and taking that directive, you're able to not only make the change within the institution that you work with, but also the ones that you're going to work closely with. You know, and you can name off any institution, but if I'm going to work with any cultural institution within the city, that's the objective, is to look at what their practices are and how they could be better suited to how they could benefit the Black community. And it's not just by hiring a Black employee.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like the thread now from the three of your comments, it pulls Dalton's talking about gleaning the facts, like get information so that you're able to not hypothetically or emotionally move forward or just emotionally react, but to actually look at what actually happened. That's everything from data, so that connects to Chris's bit around what are the hiring practices, that goes to data. Like if you did a scan, as we see people do of the culture sector, and it's not, there isn't ways beyond you getting in the door always for you to move up the ladder. So that fact element goes directly to the representation element of folks in the institutions, and then connects to what for me is kind of summarizing Ty's comments around the self-awareness. Some of your comments, Ty, kind of talked about white people understanding their privilege and thus navigating space differently because of an understanding of that privilege, and then how that connects back to funding, or how everything from how a company may spend money on what resources to how public funders may have funding available. So in thinking about those buckets, do we want to start to look at that challenge? Because I feel like you've offered up ways you could move forward from calling in, but now what is that? Whose responsibility is it? Is it about the hiring of us to get us in the organizations and a bit forward? Where's that balance between those of us on the outside and those of us on the inside? Because there's a danger, is there not, of we make recommendations, they don't work out, and then they're like, well, you know, because we've seen this. Oh, we tried that, it didn't work, and then it becomes a moot point. So how do you think about 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, based on the trajectory of, we know we've got information, we know there's information out there, what do we expect from these institutions that's not just about us having these conversations and making recommendations? Anybody can jump in. Is that you, Dalton?
Yeah, totally. I mean, because I think in Canada we have to, deal with it. It's like a case by case, country by country kind of situation. Because the racism here is so shrouded in secrecy, right? It is so incredibly underhanded. I find that a lot of the young people I mentor happen to be Black and or Indigenous. It's almost like they have to, attempt to maneuver and navigate the Canadian, let's say, music industry in a wholly different way. This is not America. We're not in the UK. It's just very different here. So I think here, when we talk about remedies, whether they be, short-term, long-term, I just don't think, with this generation, woke generation, I have 2 school-age children, I don't think they're so concerned, if you get the token Black guy, Black girl, like what we do here, it's a sort of knee-jerk response to oppression. It's a very Band-Aid, it's like a window dressing. It's what we do well here. I remember growing up in Toronto and watching City News at the time, and my parents, proud Jamaican parents, they used to go, hey, I'm going to watch City TV because there's a Black guy there, Jojo Chinto or whatever. And it seemed to me that every community, the South Asian community, the Asian community, the Indigenous community, Eastern European, there's a broadcaster that represents your interests. And I just think, just talking to young people again, I don't think that approach is going to work so well. Just further to Chris's point, I get one Black staffer, and they are somehow supposed to heal the last 42 years of oppressive hiring practices within said institution. So I think one thing, when we talk about the calling out needs to continue, because I feel, even in this framework, I'm sure a number of you have sat on a bunch of panels. Karen, you've probably done a couple dozen, as of myself, and these are not new conversations. Okay. What typically happens with panel discussions, workshops, seminars, conferences, symposia is we're able to air out our feelings, our grievances, and then collect that data, and then it kind of sort of sits there collecting dust on bookshelves. We collect it and then it goes nowhere. So I think the difference now, thanks to fantastic movements like Black Lives Matter Toronto and the global movement, when we talk about holding people to account, it's an action plan. At the CBC, where I do work out of, we just did a 5-part series podcast, Drake and other projects. They have it's a timeline. It's saying, okay, within the year, it's a fantastic plan, by the way, that a lot of people should look at. But it's saying, okay, by this, let's say the end of 2021, don't quote me here because I don't have it verbatim, but it's saying these things need to be put in place, right? Or you are going to get canceled, dragged, gaslit. HR department, we're going to end up there within this amount of time. So this is what needs to happen. We need to act out of a bit more of a sense of urgency in Toronto. If this were America, I would say, we take another approach. We take our time. We know that change is a process. It's not a moment, right? It's a process. But I think here we need to expedite that process, because these are not new conversations. This festival is Global Toronto, the global music scene. If you were to look, scene that I was kind of part of, and it's Karen, this. I worked out of the Harbourfront Center, and I think to myself, I'm like, I left there like a decade ago, and when I was there, the director was a South Asian woman. Now, because she was South Asian doesn't necessarily mean she were pro-Black or pro-anything, but it was a South Asian director. The music programmers were Black and South Asian. And then you fast forward to today, and it's, it's like a devolution, not an evolution, it's a devolution. That's what I say. So again, these are not new, and if you look at some of the institutions, you're going to be, wait a second, 8 years ago, there was like a Black programmer and an Indigenous programmer. Then you fast forward to today, and rather than there being any ascent, it's a descent. It's a downward spiral, right? So it's not progress, it's regress. That's what's happening in Toronto. This is why we have to collect the data. We have to do those forensic audits, okay? The places I worked at, it's a devolution as far as representing, as far as staffing, Black staffers, okay? That is it's sad. It's very sad to me. It's a tragedy of epic proportions. Yeah. Hey, where's Karen?
But I mean, echoing off what you were saying, Dalton, it's definitely the facts, and like actually doing that forensic research to identify how the organizations are working, and then being able to come to conclusions as to why we're going backwards rather than moving forward with the situations that we are. Why isn't there representation in Black leadership roles? And then, even we're not going to have that Black leadership representation, and the organization looks to start to staff more Black individuals. How do those Black individuals develop the skills that are necessary for them to progress within their careers? And this works in all facets. It's how does the artist meet that person in a role that could give them the tools or explain the situations that they're going to be dealt, so that they're able to actually progress with their career. And that could be anything from being a visual artist and being a musician. These organizations have the opportunities to be able to present those opportunities for individuals, and without there being that tier of leadership being covered, and then those staffers being hired and that being developed, we're left in the same positions that we were left in before, where one person gets through the door, and that one person getting through the door, they're left to hold and bear the weight of every Black person. And if it doesn't succeed, then the failure is seen, and then we don't ever do that again.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's why I'm always weary about diversity committees and stuff, because they just, they take time. And maybe they're designed in that way to take time, but once you're, and then it's like an internal thing, you know what I mean? In terms of, there's no accountability as far as did you qualitatively improve customer service or access or whatever for, Black clients of different sorts. Can people get evaluated on that? Not really. So I think yeah, definitely like the speed and urgency to move on some of this stuff like needs to be centered, like for real.
Mm-hmm. I even think the idea of having the Black organizations that are holding them accountable, because as much as I could sit within these organizations and yourselves, the power of the whole community behind it to hold them accountable, and when those changes aren't taking place, for that collective or that group to step in and be like, listen, you said that this is what you're going to do, and you can now operate behind closed doors with what it is that you said you're going to do, but we want to see actually what has been happening so that we can actually progress this. So there's this community or collective that really holds these organizations, these cultural institutions who are profiting and benefiting from Black culture.
Yep. Yeah. In Canada, it needs to take a more aggressive tone too, right? Because Ty referenced this idea of sort of like a truth and reconciliation type of thing. Like, I mean, there has to be an exchange of power happening, or you're going to be sitting here 3 years from now engaging this dialogue, which is it can get just extremely dull and uninteresting, to be saying, hey, there's not enough diversity at this organization, at this gallery, at this institution, at this hotel, at this music institution. It's just like, so this is what I mean when I stress the sense of urgency. Like, we have to really expedite the process now. It's a new day, and I'm inspired by the young people who are out there kicking and cajoling the institutions, calling out and dragging and canceling. I love that energy. I invite it. Let's see more of it, and then let's just translate that into action. I'm enjoying this moment, Chris, Ty, Karen, very much so.
Well, you know me, I'm never going to be mad about things being called out in order to deal with them, but I'm also interested in the conversations that I think all of us are starting to hear to frame. Okay, how do we move forward? How do you accountability? How do you start to look at effective plans for long-term change, so that, as you said, Dalton, we don't see one step forward and four back. You don't see processes of regression where you end up in 10 years. I don't want to be sitting with my nieces and nephews talking about what was, and then saying, here's the work they have to do again. I want to not know what to do because things have progressed so far that they're informing me about how they're navigating new spaces. So is there, in your minds, I'd say keep this, because we're getting to the last 15 minutes in about 10 minutes to let folks jump in, or last 10 minutes, if they've got some questions. But is there anything else you think we want to say about ideas on the how? And again, that how not being just about Black folks holding people accountable, because I do think that even to look at Black Lives Matter and to say, how do we empower them to not just react, but to have a strategy of long-term action, to Chris's point about that calling out that needs to be out there in the community. And so if anyone else wants to add anything else, and then we'll maybe see if there's any questions that we'll start taking.
I mean, I could add that I do think that you're starting to see some mobilizing happening from community, and in two examples. So one is something called Advanced Music, and so that's a new sort of initiative that focuses and centers Black people within the music industry, in terms of the quality of career sort of development at the label level and record label level and all of that kind of stuff, but also at the institution level. And then they're also sort of looking at other sort of advancements for access for Black folk to have careers. And then the other thing that I would want to plug as well is the Alliance for the Alliance for Unity.ca. I forget the M already. The Alliance for Music. I'll keep messing up. Let's just say, let's go to Alliance for Equity.ca. So there's some folks involved there that are doing some organizing around the music industry as well, and sort of looking to hold institutions to account as far as accountability and access and these sorts of things as well. So I'll put those two out there.
Well, that's actually a really good idea. Just like things that we know that are good creations, good benchmarks that maybe examples to follow. What about any thoughts, Dalton and Chris? We don't have any questions yet, so you can throw in things that you think people need to take a look at if they need a bit of.
Yeah, totally. Advances. Oh, go on, Chris. You go ahead.
No. Go. Keep on going. Yeah.
No, I insist. My dreadlock brother.
I was gonna say, yeah, looking out for like the two that Ty mentioned are great ways for people to find out more information. One, and to take part in in organizations that are looking to hold the businesses that operate within the cultural landscape accountable. I think a big part in some of the comments that are going through about educating those of privilege to understand their impact is really important. And understand what by them calling out, I feel is something that they should understand what that means and how that to them could be beneficial in a way that they have the opportunity if they call it an institution and that institution faults or closes, they have the opportunity to be able to go to another institution and work with them, where that's not the same for Black individuals. You only have maybe one chance to get your career off the ground, and white privilege allows for you to have multiple different opportunities to do it because people will work with you. So being able to educate those individuals, artists, and people in the responsible in these institutions to the things to their privilege. You can do that through your reading, but I do really think it's important to take part in and listen in conversations like this. Not to put the work back onto your Black friends or your Black colleagues, but if you are confused or you want to learn more, then asking that question and making yourself feel uncomfortable is definitely something that you should take part in. We've done a lot of work in this, and we will continue to do the work. This is something in the landscape that we operate within, but you definitely have to take the knowledge and understand what your impact is in the institution altogether.
There's a question about the idea of would it be more beneficial for new institutions to be founded that are led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color to take up more cultural spaces? I'm always about us. What did Tyler Perry say about, while you're trying to get a seat at their table, I'm just going to go over here and build my own table? So anybody want to comment on the need for us to build our own?
Mm-hmm. I think
it's important on both, man. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah.
I think it's
what you said.
It's important for there to be organizing that happens, in community. Like, honestly, but I think institutions rely on that a little bit too much, right? They rely on these people to do the high degree of programming and high degree of training for their staff, and all of the responsibility that comes along with organizing, and and then participate in their consultation or whatever. You know what I mean? It can't just fall completely on the community. It also has to be the responsibility of these organizations to take leadership, and the onus is on them to push to accelerate and support these growing sort of grassroots organizations. It's on both sides.
That's right.
So there's a question on the throat about the gatekeepers. The Canadian music scene has a lot of gatekeepers. A lot of them have been there for decades. We work at displacing this mentality and move past just hiring Black folks in new positions and low positions. We all know that dance where there's always a mentorship thing to recruit someone at the lowest admin level. And then there's another one to think about, which is how do we effectively recruit, mentor Black artists as producers and bookers? You want to start, Dalton?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to gatekeepers, that would probably sit atop my list of concerns, worries with the Canadian music industry, the Toronto music industry, and even this global music scene. In that the gatekeepers have been there for decades, so you don't have to be an expert in music to kind of just do a scan of who sits at the helm of most music producing. It's not there's no Black people there, none. So I mean, there's Peter Toe Music Africa, but it's basically European mostly white guys. This is Toronto. Again, can't speak to San Diego or Brooklyn. It's mostly white guys. Okay, so I think the gatekeepers. They need to be removed or remove themselves. One way of doing that, I tend to work with and hang out with some really progressive, forward-thinking white women and a couple white guys, and or we call them like neo-abolitionists, and they are, their approach is like, Dalton, this is what's happening. I'm going to, within this 6-month period, I am going to effectively remove myself from the situation. Elon Musk, like how he did that and says, no, I'm out of here, to free up, whether love him or loathe him, but it's that type of approach. So it's kind of like a succession kind of planning, saying, within a year, we expect that there will be a black person who's being groomed to take on this position. There are a ton of qualified, capable, black cultural producers, music programmers. They're everywhere. Okay, that's never been the issue. The issue is having access and also a bit of mentoring, mentorship, and success. I think succession plans are good. So if you look at the global music scene here, we can blow it up in a year. I can pro bono volunteer my time to help blow it up, to effectively remove all the just white guys. That's what I would say. So it's just, we need to blow it up. And when I say an aggressive approach, that's what we need to do. It's going to remain the same. So when you look at the Juno Awards and you look at the whole thing, it's just the same white guys over the last 17 years that I've seen, and they're still there. They remain there. And then the whole, also too, just before the whole people of color thing, that whole multicultural mythology, that's not going to work either, because there are many instances, even in the global music scene, where they're fairly multi-culty. You get representation from different regions of the world, but then it'll be devoid of any black contributions. So you can be diverse and have no black people there. So in Toronto, we do that very well. We be diverse, there are women, some white women, perhaps the token indigenous, but there's no black people there. So in Toronto, we need to be very careful. That's why I'd like to root this in anti-black racism, because there are a lot of diverse things happening in Toronto. Let's not fool ourselves, but devoid of any black people or their contributions, right? So this has to be about black people, this conversation, not people of color, because that hasn't gotten us too far in Toronto to date, Yeah.
Very true. Very, very true. So there's a couple more questions. One about funding bodies. I don't know if you want to take that one on, Ty, and the fact that the prerequisites for applying and just how they literally block you from building your own table. I can attest to this. Band was largely built with zero funding from public agencies. Apparently people think I was getting paybacks from banks, which is hilarious. I wish I knew how to do that. It would change my financial life considerably. But we just couldn't decode the funding, and we built the organization largely with our corporate partners. So I can attest to that challenge. There's a question for you about booking and being a black person working historically in white space as a booker. You're the guy who helps people get gigs in these places. So what that story's like. I don't know who wants to go first, but those are the two questions, and then we'll see if maybe we can take one more because we're at 20 after 4. Do you want to jump in first, Ty, about the funding and talk about whether or not it is inaccessible? Is that a truth to your standpoint, or is it hard for everybody?
I think there's sort of constraints in funding as it is, in terms of access as it is, like for most people. I mean, it's on those organizations. Like, if there's change that they want to see, if they want to see particular applications come in from particular communities, if they want to hire a particular type of person, or they want more black women in their organization, then just hire those people. Just like, you are totally allowed to like set aside a slot. So let's say there's an organization and they know that there's going to be an outgoing position. You're allowed to sort of look into it and say, we want to hold this spot for a person from this community. Or maybe you know that you don't have a lot of representation with like rap or something like that in your organization. You can actually just recruit people from that community to be in your organization. It's the quickest way to sort of, start to get at that change is bringing those people into the organization and paying them. You know what I mean? So I hope that answers.
So you're saying that there are issues and that it's not even a big problem for most of the funders to address. It's pretty practical.
Yeah.
Chris, what say you
Again, it's about urgency, right?
To go along with the question of how a black booker working in a space that's historically white, to answer that, don't sacrifice your blackness. Use your voice and your narrative is very important, and that representation is very needed within it. When you're navigating in a space that's historically white, there's good chances that anything that was programmed that was black didn't have the lens, and you can use Spike Lee as an example and look at film directors and story producers and writers. We have multiple different levels of history to go back on and documentation to go back on that explains what it means to be white. We don't have that same platform, that same representation with amongst, just the film industry, but, within music we do, but is it the representation that is being depicted that would allow for us as black people to move forward? And we're doing everything, and the works of it in our culture is so important. So don't sacrifice that for anything. Consistently be able to pump that out and make that your drive. I think that's the best thing that you can do, and that starts to define and allow for other black people who want to get into that role to see it. The next thing that you can do early in your career is try to find the individuals who navigate or work within those spaces, like myself or Dalton. It's a little bit more difficult to find us because there isn't an abundance of us, but whatever events that you're seeing happen within the community, there's going to be somebody that can connect you to it. So even though you might not directly know me or be able to tap into me, but you can tap into someone like Karen or Ty, there's other individuals that can link you to it. Being able to recognize and identify that is really great, and create your own spaces. If you're going to be navigating within the spaces that are historically white, you also want to be able to create something that is your identity and it's you. And that's what I mean about never sacrificing your blackness.
Yeah, totally. And just to add on to that, great points, Chris. I would say this idea of sort of a multi-generational connectivity, I think, is huge. Oftentimes, I'll be talking to 22-year-old cultural producer that might not be aware that Chris Wilson exists, or Dalton Higgins exists, or Taiwo exists, or his brother Kende. That so that generational history, or it's lost, and a lot of the tricks of the trade that I learned. Of course, I'm a little older, but I learned the tricks of trade from people that came before me. That was my sort of that's a dirty little secret. So a lot of the tricks I use to this day, it's people that were like 15, 20 years older than me, and they're still out there to this day. So I picked up pointers on what the whole, even when we talk about booking and all that, right? I'm coming from, I could be like a 65-year-old head right now because I have all that information from those that came before me. But that also comes with, respect for elder. I have, a bit of elder worship, that's me personally. So, so all the tricks and tools are there, sitting there waiting for you at your disposal. So, but it takes a bit of humility as well to kind of say, hey, I'm 28, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Dalton, you're like double my age. Well, I'm not that old, but, can we sit down and go for a cafe? And I'm always open to do that. And just sort of walk you through what booking really means, totally.
Yeah, we've got one last question that I'll maybe say if we can do like a 30-second comment on, and it's because I think it's an important one about the hiring of the two artistic directors at the music gallery, and just how to ensure that there's qualified people being hired for these roles and how to provide opportunities for training and development. This is something that's close to my heart because I worry that sometimes when these gaps are being filled, there isn't a recognition that you have people at the entry level who are ready to move up the next level, people in management and directors that are ready to move up to the executive roles. And sometimes we like to assume that those people aren't out there who are qualified, and sometimes they're out freelancing outside of the institution just because of the exhaustion. Sometimes they're inside of them. So how do we, and maybe this goes back to some of what we need to do as communities in how we connect each other, but is there opportunities, maybe Dalton, you can pick up on this and then help us wrap up, for mentorship in the community and with allies, because that's the other thing we didn't get into. I feel like that's a whole other discussion. How to identify allies that are not Black, that can be useful and can help with that training where they're making.
Yeah, for sure. Now, without that mentorship piece, if someone is, let's say we fast forward to 2021, and there are a couple Black executive directors at, arts institutions and what have you, and without that mentorship piece, it's almost I've gotten this feedback. People feel like they're set up to fail. It's just going to crumble like a bricks. So I think maybe it's a program. I'm just putting this out there, but it would be great if there were some program. If somebody is because there are a couple handfuls of people that have quite literally been there and done that. Like Karen Carter, you're one of them. You've been executive director of massive institutions. We talk about Black like booking. Like I've booked a gazillion shows. You know what I mean? And traveled the world. I've traveled to 5 continents. Like, you know what I mean? So I'm saying pro bono, or I don't mind. Kind of saying, hey, this is what it looks like. I mean, as far as touring and backline and fees and paying and deposits and balances and the whole nine, the production, the technical aspects, the sound techs, the engineers, the sound, the lighting, right? Okay, the tech crew, your backing vocals, like whatever you want to talk about. This is there are people. So that's what it is. We need to connect those dots, and it might be we have to do that under the umbrella of organizations like BAND, Black driven and owned and operated organizations, or that's where I'm feeling most hopeful, because there's that feeling of care and devotion, and there's a real feeling there. So maybe it's underneath the umbrella of a band. We do these types of programs. Because I'm just freestyling right now. This is total stream of consciousness. But this is,
You're giving me more. You're giving us more work to do with band. But you know what? It's a gauntlet we are throwing to ourselves, because one of the things that we've been looking at is how to map the country, just connect the dots, not just here in Toronto, but across the country. So that is a Canadian conversation about what's happening in the cultural space. Because as we know, if you're Black in Montreal, in Halifax, in Vancouver, in Edmonton, in Toronto, in this country. So that is an important part. But then also just having the ability to, again, keep having these conversations and shaping the research that might come out of that. We've got 1 minute left. I don't know if you guys want to quickly say thank you and anything, but they're probably going to throw us out of here in a second. Thank all of those who came online to engage and say a word. Thank you, Taiwo, Dalton, Higgins, and Chris Wilson for such an interesting conversation. I learned a few things today that I didn't know about as far as booking and around funding agencies. So they just said 30 seconds. I feel like you're on TV and you're watching them count you out.
That's right. Final thought.
Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.